How are you all doing today? Good. All right. So this morning, as I mentioned, we're fortunate to have with us Dr. Randy Waynick, and he's an associate professor here at Lone Star College. He has over 30 years of experience in corporate as well as in the education sector, right? His background is organization and management, and especially within the corporate world, he's been fortunate to work with international organizations such as Sony and Visio. Now, as you guys understand, we're teaching you economics. We want you to understand economics as much as possible. And with his knowledge and experience and expertise, he's going to shed some light on some major aspects of global economics. And I'm sure you all have been, as we ask you to, reading the news. So you've seen and heard a lot of economic activities that have been going on, right? Whether it's tariffs, business, inflation, right? So this is a great opportunity for all of us to hear from Professor Waynick about some of the more germane issues, especially even as to we're speaking today. We were just chatting a lot of amazing things that are going on. All right. So I won't go into anymore. When I looked at his profile, I was just joking with him that if I wanted to go into detail, that alone would be another lecture. So I'm going to cut it short here. And without much ado, let me introduce Professor Waynick, and let's hear what he has for us.
Yeah. And I have to stay on this side of the line because that camera is there. There it is. Hey, I'm Randy. And the reason it would take so long if he went through like my background is because I'm old. It's not really good experience, but I got a lot of experience. So I'm honored, I'm thrilled. I love to kind of talk about some stuff, especially as Moses had mentioned, there's so much going on in the world now that's really unprecedented. You know, all the stuff that we're dealing with from a political standpoint, from an economic standpoint, from wars and all the stuff that's going on is we're really at a really unique time frame in the history of America, in the history of the world. So what I hope to do is I'm just going to run through a few things. I'll kind of try to plan a couple of ideas, and then talk a little bit about some specific examples that I've been involved in relative to global business. So my background, 30 plus years at C-level in Sony organizations, startups, life-proof cell phone cases, OtterBox, Visio. So I've done a lot of things, go in and reorganize companies. 25 years with Sony. Interesting, because you guys are studying global economics and this whole idea of globalization, where we're at today, the discussions about the borders. The reality is for almost every economy, there is no border. Everything flows. You can sit in this classroom right now and order something, and it'll be packed and shipped from China before you get out of this class. So the idea of globalization, it's interesting because now you have systems. You have a system of systems sort of integrating, influencing, impacting one another. What a rich time from the perspective of what's going on with taxes and tariffs and all the trade war stuff, because it's really like crazy stuff that's going on, but it's really awesome from a scholarly standpoint, from a looking at what's going on in the world. So what I hope to do is I'm going to run through a bunch of stuff. I'll try to put a few slides up to make you think, and then I'll talk about some specific examples, and hopefully leave a few minutes at the end for any questions or answers. Won't be going deep on too much of anything, but sort of like hopefully it'll be a mile wide and about an inch deep. But then if you have questions, we can follow up. All right, so global economics, a view of real world globalization. Sounds like a good title, and I use different colors on the font, so it's got to be a good title. But the idea of this globalization, as I mentioned, we're a country filled with borders, but yet we don't have any borders because everything, commerce, logistics, infrastructure is all set up now to move everything from everywhere to someplace else. And the banking systems are integrated, currencies. Everything is so integrated now that it's a very different world than what it was even 20 years ago. So that's globalization, from this perspective. Of course, It's not working. Okay,
Is it on?
Try now.
there we go.
There it is.
So this is global business from my perspective. You know, I think a picture says 1,000 words. So global business, you're always looking around. So this was kind of me in the United States. We were doing good in the United States. I had tremendous market share, hitting all my numbers, exceeding all my numbers, my growth and product development, stuff like that. And that's when I was with Sony. So that's kind of the world I lived in there. My world was the United States, North America. When I actually went to and did a startup for Robo 3D, desktop printers, desktop 3D printers, it was a very different situation because I was a really small fish in a really big pond. And then it's interesting when you start to look at this, you know, here I could eat everything I wanted in that bowl, but when I was a small startup, no infrastructure, no funding. It was a very different world. Everything was an opportunity. That creates problems and challenges when you start looking at global businesses, when you start looking at global brands. So I kind of view that as the way my career, my experiences have gone. Working with Sony, one of the top brands in the world, you know, millions, billions of dollars of assets that I could do whatever I wanted to do, go in and conquer any market I wanted to go into. Small startup company, which is the majority of the companies are small, maybe not startups, but they're small. Looking globally is a daunting task. But you are impacted, you are affected by the global economy, even if you just sell in the United States. We should always give examples like, so if you're an avocado farmer in San Diego, the border is like 10 miles away. So, you were still impacted by pricing decisions because the trucks would come over and they'd go to Costco. They didn't buy from your little stand in San Diego. They bought from these large growers in Mexico. So even though you were doing your own little sort of avocado stand, you were actually impacted because if your prices was too far out of line with Costco, nobody would stop. So we're all impacted by it. Just to give you some perspective, this is sort of the size of the prize as far as the export models. Now, the message is really strong here as you look at the United States is still incredibly formidable. But you look at others like China, the whole sort of the Asian corridor is massive, is from that standpoint. But the EU is really strong. So you're seeing all these massive opportunities. And the point is there's if you're the big fish in the little bowl, you may not see this. If you're the little fish in the big bowl, you're looking for opportunities. You're looking how to grow. And you start looking at these markets. One of the key things that I was always successful in any expansion or any program I was about going global was using the data. There's tons of data available. How big is the market share? What's the disposable income look like? How much discretionary income do they have? What's the level of college education? Simple things like where do they go to buy the products? That was a massive challenge for me as we were doing this small startup because here you go to Best Buy, you go to Walmart, you go to Costco. It's kind of simple when you go to buy products. Other countries, it's not like that. So you have to learn through all this stuff. You look at the market, you look at the size. One of the things I did, one of the discussions I'll talk about later is we had to make a decision. Do we go into Europe or do we go into Australia? And I'll unpack that a little bit, give you some insight into that. But you had to do it smart. You had to do it understanding it's a global market. You also had to understand that there's no market in there that doesn't bleed into another market. So close economic integration countries and peoples of the world. So if you buy into this idea, there's no borders. So everybody's kind of linked on the financial, the banking system, interest rates, investment, global investment, capital allocation to different countries, different regions, things like that. You start to sense that you cannot disconnect. You're doing the small little avocado stand on the side of the road. You're still impacted by global business. What's coming over from Mexico, selling into Costco in San Diego. So you can't divorce yourself, even if you're not in the global business marketplace. And that was one of the key things that, going through a large company with $1 billion in business to a small startup with, a few million dollars actually in business, could never escape this idea of how connected whatever our efforts were if it was focused on the US or was focused on global, how they related, how they were integrated with economies around the world. So what does that kind of look like? Basically it's this in business, your handshakes, it's all well and good. Now that could be business people, that could be governments, that's economies. On the surface, it's all let's make business, let's grow. The essence of global trade is, hey, if we're trading with people, there's a good chance we're not going to kill people. So globalization, World Trade Organization, all this stuff back in when it really started to ramp up on a global way, going back to I think it's the 30s, Benton Road, or all the folklore of how it started. But the idea was, how do we keep peace on a global basis? So it looks like that, but the reality is you're kind of going at it. You're fighting, whether it's customers or clients, consumers, governments, regulators, financial institutions. So global trade is actually, while it's a handshake, it's also a fist fight. And I've learned that from my experiences going through things. Now, I would ask, you can't really see what this is, but what does this represent? Any thoughts on what this might be? And you're missing part of it. Here's the whole idea. Wow, he's got a really weird slide. What does it mean? The whole idea is you have to account in global business other perspectives. So if you're looking at this object from the top down, it looks like a circle on the bottom. If you look at it from the side, it looks like a square. If you look at it from that side, it's a triangle. That's global business. So you're looking to get out of your fishbowl and grow your business. You're looking at, what's it going to be? Like, what do I need in that marketplace? And it depends on where you sit, the way you look at it. So if you're in the United States and you're trying to sell into Australia, you have a certain mindset, a certain view, and you have to push out of that. If you don't, you'll make some big mistakes. Could be critical errors in your business plan. Just to give you some, the impact of economics or the impact on economics. So this is kind of what it looks like as far as exports. And this stops in 2020, but you can see what's all the discussion. What's the real conflict point in the United States today? It's basically China. Everything kind of revolves around us versus China. Russia's like they invaded Ukraine. We don't like it. You're bad. But Russia's economy is not as critical. It's not as big as China's. China is massive. Moses and I were having a discussion, a debate, disagreement, argument over the economies and the way we're approaching it and stuff like now. But you see what's fueling any thought, any perspective you have is being fueled by things like this. We own the world. It's our way or the highway. In reality, that's changed. Now you have, instead of the US being the superpower, now you have China and the United States, the superpowers. And the economies, the businesses, the supply lines, across the board are so immersed in one another. So that's what's driving a lot of the discussions, taxes and tariffs that are going on, regulation, all the things that are going on. Somebody feels threatened. Everybody feels threatened in this situation. So it's interesting when you look at how it's radically changed. You guys are studying economics, the World Trade Organization. You look at different, what's going on. What are the formal institutions in other countries and how are they driving it? Just the tariff discussion alone is so rich to look at what's going on. Because, is it the tax or the tariffs that's the issue? No, it's all the stuff underneath. Nationalism, security, national defense, money, economies, growing middle classes. All those things are kind of baked into that, and it creates fear, and it creates the way people deal. So here's my case studies. Robo 3D, a startup in San Diego. Started out small, a couple of students in college had an idea to make a 3D printer. They did a GoFundMe page, Indiegogo, I think it was, a crowdsourcing sort of a model. And then they woke up 3 weeks later and they had about $600,000-700,000 to create a company. They didn't have a product. So they rushed to try to figure this thing out. So they brought a few people in and we created a company and we took it public. Based in San Diego, everything happened in San Diego, except for we took it public in Australia because all the money was coming from Australia. All the funding was coming from Australia. So we wanted to be on the Australian Stock Exchange. Plus, the regulations were far lower to be listed on the Australian Securities Exchange versus the New York Stock Exchange. Foxconn, I've worked with Foxconn in multiple roles. Foxconn is the world's largest manufacturer. It's Chinese, it's South Korea, it's Taiwanese based, but it's incredibly it's China based company. So I've worked with them in different capacities. Working at Sony, where they pretty much do whatever I wanted, and discount it and do it a day earlier than anybody else, or working at Robo, where basically they were almost a pariah, trying to consume this company because they had the production lines, they could do it. I had no money, so I was a low-hanging fruit. But they served an incredible benefit to a startup company because you have respect, you have manufacturing excellence, you're tapped into thousands and thousands of engineers that can make your product better. So I work with Foxconn in both situations. LiveProof did that. But basically, I'm going to try to hit a couple of examples about my experience in global markets and how did that work or how didn't it work, what to be aware of. So here's the thing, 2 examples. Things I'll talk about is culture and regional aspect, understanding what's going on, the market you're going to, because the way you view it here, if you're looking at that object, is it a circle, is it a square, is it a triangle, and then expansion. Because if you're the small fish in the big bowl, the global market is really, really tempting. You want to get out into other markets. You want to get new revenue streams. You want to expand into different new markets. Potentially leads to a bigger vision. You'll create new products, and your stuff is the best. So you've got to do good in these other countries. Just an example. What I kind of put this up here. I said 2 examples. Just language alone has been an incredible nightmare when you're trying to market products globally. And you're not necessarily moving from different continents to one another. Had enormous challenges just selling up into Quebec, in Canada. And this is about 10 years ago, because now it's mandated across the country. French is a primary language. But if just the example of 2, there's like about a dozen different ways I could have said 2 examples. Knowing, we're in the United States, knowing that, primarily English is the dominant language. I went with the US version as opposed to the Portuguese. Because I'm trying to communicate a message. I'm trying to make this, this lecture a product, and I want you to understand, I want you to get it. So I'm talking about 2 examples. So I'll go through basically the culture region aspect of it. It's critically important no matter where you go. And then also from the idea of, so now what? What's the next market? All right, so regional, language requirements, certificates, taxes, tariffs, and price. I dealt with that. So I dealt with that when I was at Sony. I dealt with that when I was at Robo 3D. Virtually every company I've been at, I've had to deal with these issues. And you go through with it, and language requirements alone, some of the examples will be, you look at selling in Quebec. Well, it sounds like it's no big deal. It's Canada. We're the same, but we're not. We're 2 different economies, 2 different countries, 2 different laws and regulations, 2 different languages. UL certifications, customs, how long, how fast, how much. Every decision that you sell, because if you go into a regional market and you have all these additional customs and charges on it, it's probably going to raise your cost, which will raise your price. You've just become uncompetitive versus something that's produced in that country. So how do you deal with that? And then purchasing across borders. There are no borders. So from the perspective of, and I'll unpack a little bit more when I start talking about the Robo 3D example, Australia, what countries to expand into. Selling in Quebec. So I was selling products, actually almost every company I've been associated with, we all, like Canada, it's like it's next door, let's sell Canada. I grew up in Detroit. So Canada was like the next city over. It wasn't a country, it was just another city. So we get a little bit, I think, biased or a little bit blinded by how close in proximity. Same thing with Mexico. Depending on where you live, Mexico is just right in San Diego. I lived for 18 years. Just a few miles down there. It's no big deal. You start to assume and things like that. I tried to sell product into Quebec, actually cell phone cases into Quebec. And it was a nightmare trying to sell cell phone cases into Quebec through distribution, but also through Apple stores. I had to spend so much time and money on the translation. It was incredible. It's not, you can't go to Google Translate because different words have different meanings. Google Translate may pick it up, may not pick it up. Google Translate doesn't take care of any regional differences within a language. You know, if you, like even in the United States, you go to different places and there's just a different talk, there's different sayings, there's different things. So you can't do that when you're shipping product in. And it was a major hassle. So at first, how did I get around with it? I sell it anywhere but Quebec, and then distribution would ship it into Quebec, which was legal. Now you could say it's a little bit questionable, but that's the way the industry did it. Because Quebec, 20, 30 years ago, implemented French was the language of the country, and everything had to be in French. So it was a real challenge. So what the company, how the economy, how the market adjusted to it is like the other provinces didn't have that. So you could sell into those over in Vancouver or wherever, or Toronto, and they would ship it up to Quebec. But it was a nightmare. So when you got to deal with, right, at that point early on, that was a solution, but then it got tight and it was across country. And then if you wanted to sell into Apple, you couldn't sell a Quebec version and all other Canada version. So I spent a ton of money to just create the right translations. But then how do you get it to fit into a small little box and not take up tons of pages and pages and pages, but still satisfy the legal requirements? It has to be French first language. So it was an enormous challenge, and people don't even think about that because you don't even look at those things when they come in, in the package. But it was a major hurdle to do business in Canada. You could drive to Canada. It wasn't a big logistic nightmare. It was a massive challenge on the design side. And then, so how do you say it? And you can't depend on Google Translation. You can't depend on it. It becomes a real challenge. And I'll give you an example. UL certification. So you had to spend tons of money. And it's not just the money that you had to go through. It was the time for them to test. At Robo 3D, it took us forever. It took us months to get product UL certified. So they're saying it's safe and it's not going to blow up on people. But then I had to apply for the Canadian UL version, and I had to wait longer. Now this is a startup company. We don't have any money. And we're basically living on fumes. I'm not taking a check. I'm not taking payroll because we don't have the money. And I have to wait. I have to pay for a system for a certification through Canada, which basically was equal to the United States version, but they didn't have the agreement between the two. So it cost me money, but it delayed time in the marketplace. And that's just doing business with Canada, which is probably one of the easier ones for us to do business with. Customs, I was decided we're going to move into Europe for these Robo 3D machines. And then where I ship them to, who I had a partnership or a joint venture with, within the EU had a big difference because some of them had a certain status with the customs offices. Some of them had like pre-approval, pre-clearance, and stuff would actually kind of go through really fast. Otherwise, I had to hire a independent, sort of a bonded warehouse. Stuff would go there. Customs, when they had time, would go around and inspect your stuff and then release it for sale, time and money. So it became an incredible challenge because, especially at a startup, you don't have the funds. You don't have that. If you don't start turning that product, you're out of business. So an enormous challenge when you start looking at it. And here we are in San Diego. We think we've got this incredible product. We had a lot of success on Amazon in the United States, and the world's just waiting for us to deliver this product to them, but we couldn't do it. We ultimately did, but it cost us dearly to do that. And that's one of the challenges that actually nobody really foresaw going into the business. And that's where they were, on the brink of losing everything. And they brought a couple people in to sort of like get things in order where we could actually do business in other countries. Partial in part to that was we had to have fully audited books because we're going to try to make an offering in the stock market in different countries. We were selling the right to invest. So we had to have a whole different level, which cost hundreds of thousands of dollars just for audited statements. Purchasing cross-border. So, that slide showed EU was a big portion of the market and Australia was really small. I'm a startup company and all my investors are in Australia, but I couldn't sell in there because it was so competitive. So the pricing was so just out of line. The machines would cost $700-800. I'd spend almost $1,000 to get the machines over there. But the market, there was somebody based in Australia that were making 3D printers that were, they were all fine. And they were like half the price of it. And I couldn't sell into there. And I had all these investors like, why aren't you selling these guys? But the model based upon the transportation costs, based upon the regulations, based upon a whole nother set of certifications that we had to go through in testing, it just didn't allow it to sell through. And on top of that, you could buy it from 42nd Street Photo in New York, their mail order business. They were so big, so massive that they could ship the product at a fraction of what it cost me to ship it to Australia. So actually, we would sell the 42nd Street Photo, huge online presence, especially big in Australia for whatever reason. And people in Australia would buy it from a US company, warehouse in the United States. They would ship it from New York all the way out to Australia, cheaper than I could even get it there. So you have to understand there are no borders. And because of costs, whether it's certifications, whether it's taxes, tariffs, whatever is involved, logistics alone, if that adds too much to your cost, you're going to be competing against somebody that can probably do it cheap. It's a real dilemma. It's a real nightmare. So then you look at, well, how can we, so what market do we pick? So even though all my money was coming from Australia, I'm not selling Australia. I can't sell them. I'll go broke. So I focused on the EU. And we did a lot of business in Germany and actually Italy. There was a big market for 3D printers in Italy. So you've got this, perspective, small startup, just California based, and you got this big conglomerate, global multinational business. This was the structure at Sony, just to give you some idea, but very top. Sony feeds into this. And you see across it, basically, games, networking, music, pictures. Then you got all the electronics and solutions. You've got the imaging business, financial services, and other. They're actually a financial institution in Japan, life insurance. Sony's big in that space in Japan. So this is the way it's all set up. Now, the discussion is on, you have to consider the culture in the region locally. Because if you don't, you could run into some real challenges down the road. So that's the way it was set up. Now you can imagine just how did I interact with that? Because I was based in San Diego, but I spent a week, a month every year for about 6 years in Japan, working with the business group. Now this was basically how Sony Corp was set up, very high level, very simple from the electronic side. So you had all these different businesses. They would fit down into big broad buckets. So this is all based over in Japan. And you have these big broad buckets. And then they go across from there, they go across the different regions. So there's far more regions, but this is to try to make it a little bit simpler. So you have Sony Corp, you have electronics, you have divisions in electronics, and then you have all these different regions that you have to do business for. Well, that becomes problematic right there because color preferences in one country are different than another country. One of the biggest challenges I had was because in the United States, bigger was better. We wanted TVs the size of walls. That doesn't sell in Asia. The rooms are very small. So that was a real issue. How did that impact me in the United States? Because it slowed down the engineering. It slowed down the development of larger screen sizes because that wasn't a global product. That was a US product, North American product. But it wasn't a global product. They had to make decisions about which market are we going to go to. If you didn't have it in the United States, the bigger screen sizes, you would do no business. So there was a constant balance. How do you communicate all that? So basically, those divisions break into subdivisions, TV, audio, and video. Then from there, you have the regions pointing up to it. And regions, it could be Houston region, or it could be North America. And I was North America. But there was Asia, there was EU, there was India, there was Latin America. There was all these different regions. So you have all this information, and trying to keep it all straight is a challenge at best. And then from North America, had people reporting into specific units. And the idea was to harmonize, make it all sort of cooperate and work together across the country. Because not only is there a 42nd Street photo that's selling in the United States to someplace else, there's a store in the EU that's selling product that's actually being shipped over to the United States at a lower cost. And that completely disrupts your marketplace. So even if you don't want to do global business, you're impacted by global business. Your pricing, your competitiveness, your distribution, all of that matters. And I dealt with that firsthand because, we'd sell something and there would be products that they call it, you may know what they used to call it, I don't think they call it gray market. So gray market is product that's designed for another country. There's different cost elements, different logistic elements. There's, all kinds of different things involved. How much does a retailer make on selling your product? So there's different prices, and it's not they're trying to take advantage of one market versus the other, but there's different prices based upon cost. But somebody over in Italy would take this product, had a cost advantage, and then ship it over to the United States. They had too much inventory somewhere in the EU, and to get rid of it, they just basically just dump it. No markup, no margin. They just ship it off and sell it to somebody in the US who would buy it and then sell it, undercut the marketplace, completely destroy. While we're doing our stuff over here in the United States, we're doing everything fine, everything's good and all that, we still had to be impacted, we still were impacted by global pricing on it didn't matter what market you were in. So that sort of, it gets really crazy. And then it breaks down in the United States by different functions, by different regions, and then by different products, or actually retailer type. Like I said, if you go to Japan, you go to buy something, what you'll end up doing is going to several different stores. So the idea of, like, I did a lot of work with Walmart. We went into Japan and tried to study what was going on. They acquired a big company there. But people don't shop like they do here. They'll go in and they'll buy, this is where I go to buy groceries. This is where I go buy to buy flour versus sugar at this store. And it's very compartmentalized, very different. Lots of small little regional stores. Now they still have some big, massive centers and stuff like that. But in general, the shopping patterns, the distribution patterns are very different than what we're used to in the United States. So it has impact on all that. So it would be so frustrating because, trying to negotiate a deal with somebody. I work with Walmart and Costco on a global basis. And it's like, yeah, this is the deal here, but that's not the deal there. And it's like, well, why, just make it that way. Why don't you just do it? Because that's not the way the business runs. That's not the way the market responds to it. So another example is on the marketing side. So I took over the business and we were just launching flat panel TVs. It was a big boom area, LCD and plasma, the old big giant rear projection TVs. The US market was huge for those TVs. No other market virtually existed for big projection TVs. We're taking the world over. We're going to launch this product. It's great technology. And at the introduction, prices could be high. We could make a lot of money off of it. And we came out with, well, actually, it wasn't called Bravia. It was called Bravio. And that was going to be the global name for this product launch. We are literally within a month of launching shipping product. And somebody says, well, wait a second, Bravio, you guys know what that means? Like, what are you talking about? Global organization. Well, it turns out Bravio is slang in some Latin America countries, Mexico. And actually, there's a whole nother meaning that's even worse than this. So you're going to launch your stake in the ground. We are this, and it's basically we're uneducated heathens or something like that. And there's actually a much worse definition in slang terms in a good portion of Latin America. We could not come out with a product called Bravio. All kinds of bad. Now we're about a month away. All the materials are done. All the filings have been done. The patents have been done. Everything's registered. Marketing's been created. We're ready to launch. And we have to change the name from Bravio to Bravia. And it was because global translations. They didn't understand. In Japan, they thought they could call it. They didn't know about slang terms in Mexico or Latin America. So they had to stop the launch. Millions of dollars were wasted because we had to reprint, we had to refile, we had to do everything else to change the name from Bravi O to Bravia. One letter, millions of dollars. Worse than that, it was delaying us to get into the marketplace. Years had gone into developing this project, this product, and we were in front of everybody else. We were going to own the market, first mover advantage, all that sort of stuff. So we could take the couple $1 million hit for all the fees and the refilings and stuff like that. But to lose the market share, because once somebody bought a large screen TV, once somebody bought, they were out of the market for years. So you miss all that opportunity, and you have the stuff made sitting in a warehouse somewhere. So language is a big deal. Japan, they just thought it was okay. They didn't realize it. And it turned out to be millions of dollars in cost in a delayed market. Now, we recovered. Fortunately, we were so far ahead of everybody else that we were able to recover. So it kind of works out. I took over right when this was going on. So it's not my fault. And I'm the one that made it all good. None of that's true. But it goes to show you how you have to think regionally. Words matter. The color of TVs. We fought for certain colors of TVs. It had to be, they used to call it piano black about 15 years ago, shiny black. But other markets were not doing that. Actually, Samsung in South Korea started introducing, they called it Bordeaux. And it was a red bezel around the TV. It was a huge hit for years. People were buying red TVs. So, but that was coming in different marketplaces, different, people, different trends and colors based upon design, based upon preference in different marketplaces. So you can't, the one size fits all doesn't work when you're talking global. If you're making a number 2 pencil, it works. Anything else, it's going to be a problem. So when you go into other markets, this is what I want to show you. This is kind of the way it was at Sony. We did everything vertically. We owned the factories. We did everything. Actually, the factories in the United States, we created our own glass factory. We were making our own glass. So we did everything. What it moved to, though, was basically this idea of pushing as much as possible out. We got the factories out. We actually sold a lot of the factories to Foxconn. We did all that stuff. We started sourcing components from different suppliers, not just necessarily making it ourselves or having somebody who was exclusive to Sony for manufacturing components. We still kept the primary activities, but when you start to look at different marketplaces, how do you go about it? If you're a big Sony, if you're you're the big fish in the small tank and you're going to take over the world, you have infrastructure. You do fund operations in other countries. If you're a small startup, Robo 3D, all you can do is partner with people. Try to leverage or try to get joint ventures, try to do things like that. In Robo 3D, I couldn't hire. I couldn't open up a store in Poland. I couldn't open up stores in the EU. So what was my method to get to the marketplace? Well, hire somebody in the marketplace that knows the market, knows the translation, knows the population, knows the distribution, where people go, things like that. Hire that person and as a contract employee, he's my sales agent. He sets up all the deals with distributors. He knows which stores to go to. He knows things like color or language variations for different regions. He knows, what school systems are actually funding 3D printers for their classrooms. So hire somebody in the marketplace because I didn't know it. There's no way I could actually pull that out of all the data. So you have to use local expert. And thank God we opened up a small office for him. We hired a few more people, and it was sort of like the cornerstone of our distribution strategy outside of the United States because that's where we were getting so much business out of the EU. I tried to force it by doing deals with Amazon and just thinking Amazon's going to be my solution to everything. Well, what you find out is Amazon in the UK is not nearly as developed or sophisticated or broad as the Amazon we know in the United States. I worked with Amazon in Mexico for years, and we could never get things going in Amazon Mexico because that's actually interesting because so much of the business in Mexico is based upon credit. And Amazon didn't have the vehicle in place where they could offer credit to everybody individually. Whereas if you went to the local store in Mexico, they had credit facilities and programs you could get for. Amazon couldn't execute on it. regulations, technology, cost, all these sort of things. So the Amazon in Mexico, now it's changed over the last decade. Amazon in Mexico was way behind all the other Amazons. But I couldn't force it. I couldn't talk about how much business I'm doing with Amazon in the United States. It didn't matter. It didn't work in their marketplace. It didn't work based upon their consumer preferences, choices. Okay, so Robo 3D. So how do you enter foreign markets? You want a sharp dart, not a dull dart. You get data, you pull up reports, you hire somebody local. You don't rely on Google as your primary research source. Talk to people in the marketplace. You look at the cost. You look at all the rules and regulations. If we had known that we were going to go through all the regulations on certifications for the engineering, for the power bricks, the power supply, we would have pulled out. It's like, that's incredible. It's going to take me 6 months to get the certifications. I'm going to be burning money. I have to go into production because they won't give you final approval until you actually have production product. I don't have the money to sit on production product to wait for a certification. In hindsight, I wouldn't have done it. Wouldn't have gone into the EU. Probably would have just doubled down the efforts in the United States. Choice of entry models, I try to compare and contrast the Sony versus a startup. So Sony, we did foreign direct investment. We wanted to go to a country, bought a building, we bought land, we hired people on our payroll. We were in foreign direct investment is typically you're looking at tens, if not hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to go into a country. You open a facility, you open a factory, you hire people on your payroll. It's a lot of money. So little companies don't do foreign direct investment. But Sony, we had all the resources. So we would go in, that's kind of the way we'd do it. We'd maybe partner with somebody, we'd buy people out a lot of times, and we would go into the market that way. For a non-equity model, Robo, we had to go in there, we would export. So you could buy our product and ship it out of the United States through intermediaries. We did, some indirect exports through some custom installs, some people that would serve in the education market. We didn't do any license and franchising. We were actually working with Foxconn to license them to create our product with their badge, with their nameplate, and sell it. Because they have access to hundreds of thousands of people that just work at Foxconn. And then, so we did contractual agreements. I'd open up distributors and rep firms and stuff like that. I couldn't play on that side. So my entry into the marketplace was really non-equity. Distribution, find somebody locally. We would ship product over there. I had one situation, we shipped a bunch of product. It was in a warehouse in Germany. I'm paying for this product to sit there, in addition to all the money that's tied up in the inventory. Plus, I'm paying monthly fees for this warehouse. Then, if the distributor sold out of the warehouse, I'm paying all of that plus a commission on top of that. Oh, then it turns out we sold out at Amazon. I can't produce enough to get them over here in time for Christmas. So then we couldn't forestake the Amazon supply. We couldn't let them down because they would boot you. You wouldn't get any more business. So I was shipping stuff out of a product manufactured in China, moved into a warehouse in Germany, costing me money. I'm not making any money on this. It's all out at this point. Then I ship it into the United States by air freight, just so I can satisfy the Amazon gods and not get kicked out of Amazon. Every unit I was losing several $100s. So you can see where a small startup just can't weather that sort of storm. You see somebody like Sony. So we didn't like Bravio versus Bravia, but we could take the hits. Most companies can't. All right, big questions. Cost, certifications. You got that. So actually, at this point, a lot of people don't realize just how big. And I think the dialogue has been elevated, but how big just in North America. You look at North America, the business between the United States, Mexico, and Canada, it's massive. To our earlier discussion, if we could get Mexico and Canada to follow what we want to do, you would see almost every economy quake. They couldn't survive. And forgetting all the political reasons, right now, U.S. and China, they're both this pissing match about who's going to win and who's not. They're both desperate. So it's interesting. You start looking at this, going back to, Australia's not on this list. I got people that are investing millions of dollars in my business, and I'm not going to sell it in your country. Went to the UK, much bigger market. Transportation costs were less. There was more disposable income that people were interested, in this sort of maker evolving STEM STEAM sort of a initiative. I didn't go to Australia. I couldn't compete in Australia. All right, things I experienced in learning going. Be prepared, expect the unexpected. What could go wrong? It's going to go wrong. You hear that probably in every business, but the reality is now you're dealing with somebody else's language, somebody else's law, somebody else's customs, somebody else's color preference. So you have to just really go through that. Chances are you, in your capacity, are not going to have that information. Most companies won't have that information. So you have to go outside. Slow down, speed matters, but get on the road early. You got to start thinking, if you're going to expand, you got to start thinking well before you start investing any dollars in expanding. You don't just go into another market. If you're selling a service, it could be a little bit different, but if you're selling a product, you just don't go into a market unless you can weather a storm for about 6 months. You've got to start early in that planning process. You've got to start early in every aspect of it, because things are going to go wrong. You're not going to know that in addition to this certification, you have to get another certification on the electrical outlets. And all this stuff will just bleed you right out of business. Establish trust. What's in it for them? We had great partners and stuff like that. But if my product didn't attract enough sales, if my product didn't pay enough margin, if my product was, way more difficult, time constrained as far as trying to sell it, why would they want to sell me? So that's at the distribution center. What about in the store? If you go into the store and you don't have the right marketing materials, it's the wrong language. Even today, like you buy some of the stuff from Amazon, you'll get the instruction manuals, and they don't even make sense. It's like, what are they trying? The words are messed up and stuff like that. So will consumers spend a lot of time to dissect what you're trying to say? Probably not. Respect cultural differences. The other thing, I won't get into it, but Hofstede's cultural power matrix. If you guys don't know Hofstede, you should look at it. It's really interesting. In the United States, we're all independent. Anybody can be president, entrepreneur, social, starting out on your own is a big part of it. But other countries, one of the marketing campaigns we did in actually some of the stuff we were trying to do in South Korea and Taiwan, we had to take a much different sort of a collective, sort of a good for society, good for everyone in your family versus you're going to look like a star. We had to take a very different approach because the cultures are very different. Respect cultural differences. I was not the center of the universe. Figured that out pretty quick. Just because we were a big deal in the United States, just because we were a #1 item on Amazon, didn't carry a lot of weight when you're trying to sell into a different country. And understand no culture is inherently superior in all aspects. It's never our way or the highway. I think I've seen a lot of people coming from the United States with a hard-earned, a rightful sort of an attitude of, no, this is the way we do it. This is, we know what we're doing. That's not, just so you know, that's probably not true. There's other ways to do things. Your way is not necessarily right. If you go in to a global business and you feel like you have this authority over their market, their customers, their behaviors, you're not going to do very well. So first, admit your ignorance, admit what you don't know, get the people that do know, spend some time thinking about, now, why is it they want, and the instruction guide and French. So you have to understand the marketplace. So I think that's about it for me. Small startup, big multi-billion-dollar business, same issues. One, I had lots of resources, lots of money in the bank. I could weather those storms. The other, people didn't get paid. Okay, any questions? How about that cool graphic? The hand holding the globe with a question mark. Pretty cool stuff, right? Okay. Hey, cool. Well, that's it.
Yeah, you know, that's about it.
Thank you. I think that
Guys don't have any questions?
there's the thank you. You see that? Do you guys see that? That's really good stuff. That works in all markets. The rotating thank you is really big. And then do something nice with somebody. I say that in every lecture because wow, you guys have this opportunity to be cultural ombudsmen. You can be the advocates for doing something nice right here in Moses' class. All right, cool. That's it. Thank you.
Very much
Good.
for giving us this opportunity. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
So much. Appreciate it. The outcome is interesting. So we were able to record it?
Yep.
Thank you so much.